Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a stone corridor, lit by flickering candlelight, the air laced with incense and the ghost of whispered prayers. Your feet fall softly on cold flagstones, and outside, the wind hums like a lullaby whispered through the cloisters. You are alone, but not lonely. Not yet. Around you, walls thicker than a castle's spine hold centuries of secrets, sleepless thoughts, and silent surrender. You probably won't know this, but medieval monks, those guys with shaved heads and wool robes, had surprisingly effective sleep habits. Not by choice, mind you. They weren't curling upon ergonomic mattresses with lavender diffusers and white noise apps. Nope. They were mastering the art of slumber in between night vigils, fasts, and freezing stone beds. Yet somehow, many of them found peace somewhere between the Psalms and the night chill. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the abbey's narrow corridor, the scent of wax and ancient wood curling around you. It's past sunset, and you've already finished your one decent meal of the day: bread, maybe a boiled turnip if the harvest was kind. Silence has blanketed the monastery since the bell rang for vespers. You haven't spoken in hours, but your thoughts, oh, they won't shut up. You push open the wooden door to your cell. It creaks just enough to remind you you're alive. Inside, a tiny bed stuffed with straw, a wooden stool, and a crucifix nailed to the wall. That's it. No bookshelf, no nightstand, no screens glowing like tiny suns in the dark. Just stillness, just you. Welcome to the life of a medieval monk, where sleep was sacred, disciplined, and, let's face it, kind of brutal. But here's the twist: that brutality carved a psychological groove. The strict rhythms and deprivation trained the mind to wind down, not because it was soothed, but because it had no other option. You'd collapse into sleep not out of comfort, but out of a weird kind of surrender. And your brain, oddly enough, adapted. Modern psychology calls this sleep pressure. The longer you're awake, the more adenosine builds up in your brain, making you feel like you've been lovingly tackled by a herd of sleepy sheep. Medieval monks unknowingly leaned into this concept, creating a predictable cycle of fatigue and rest, day after day, year after year. Researchers today say we're too overstimulated to sleep well. Too much light, too much sugar, too many TikTok dog videos at 1:37. But monks didn't have that problem. Their world was dim and predictable. Your brain right now might actually crave that kind of monotony. The cell is cold, but your wool blanket scratches just enough to make you aware of your skin. No distractions, no dopamine buffet. You lie down, facing the stone wall, the silence thick enough to feel. Your thoughts begin to quiet, not because of a podcast or a breathing app, but because there is simply nothing else. It's fascinating. Mainstream studies have shown that sleep hygiene improves when we remove mental clutter before bed. No phones, no doom scrolling, just a clear cue. It's time. That's what the monastery gave you. Every bell was a cue, every hour a frame. The body could trust the pattern. Of course, that didn't mean everyone was a peaceful sleeper. Far from it. Some monks wrote in journals. Yes, they had those, about nighttime terrors and temptations, demons lurking in dreams, strange noises, the urge to sneak extra bread from the kitchen, loneliness pressing on the chest like a ghost. One rather obscure tidbit: some monks actually tied themselves with ropes during the night, not in a medieval 50 Shades kind of way, more like a psychological anchor. The discomfort reminded them to stay present, to resist temptation, to suffer nobly in their own little sleep chamber of virtue. Philosophers still argue whether these habits fostered genuine peace or just repression with a side of sleep debt. Was this spiritual serenity, or just sock syndrome in a robe? And yet you drift, your thoughts slow, syncing with the rhythm of your breath. The scratch of straw beneath your shoulder becomes background texture. You're last conscious. Moment is marked by a single candle flickering near the crucifix. Then darkness. The funny part. You'll be up again in a few hours, but that's not the tragedy, it's the design. See, this wasn't an 8-hour, Netflix-sponsored REM marathon. Monks divided their sleep into chunks, usually 2 or even 3, known today as segmented sleep. This ancient pattern involved dozing after dusk, waking in the middle of the night for prayer or existential staring, and then sleeping again until dawn. And guess what? Some modern sleep researchers say our brains prefer this pattern. You've probably experienced this. Wake up at 3 a.m., stare at the ceiling, and assume something's wrong with you. But in the Middle Ages, that was normal. That was your time for reflection, dreams, or quietly watching the moon climb across the sky like a slow silver thief. It's not insomnia, it's intermission. And in those quiet spaces between the sleep blocks, monks sometimes wrote poetry, prayed, or just stared into the void. Honestly, that's not so different from modern journaling or nighttime meditation. Except, without the Spotify playlist titled Nighttime Zen, lo-fi cathedral beats to sleep pray to. So tonight, maybe you'll experiment. Let the structure hold you. Let the dark be boring. Let your thoughts meander without chasing them down rabbit holes. Let sleep come, not because you force it, but because your mind, like that monk in his tiny cell, finally has nowhere else to be. You jolt awake before you even realize what stirred you. There's no alarm clock, no buzzing phone vibrating under your pillow, no glowing numbers blinking 3:17 a.m., just a bell low and solemn, echoing across the cloister like the heartbeat of the stone itself. This is the Matins bell. It tolls in. The dark, calling you not to panic but to prayer. Welcome to your nightly interruption. In the medieval monastery, this wasn't a disruption, it was sacred scheduling. Monks rose in the middle of the night to chant psalms and walk, bleary-eyed, into the cold chapel. No one hit snooze. No one said, "I'll just watch the recording later." This was part of the rhythm. It might sound brutal, but here's the twist. It actually helped them sleep better overall. Modern psychology is starting to take second looks at this interrupted sleep model. It's called biphasic sleep, the idea that 2 separate periods of rest with a wakeful gap in the middle might actually be more natural for human beings than one long block. Some researchers argue it aligns better with our ancestral patterns, especially when artificial lighting wasn't around to trick our brains into thinking it was still daytime. So you sit up in the straw bed. Your body's tired but used to this. There's a kind of soft grogginess, not the frantic, "Oh no, I overslept" jolt, but a muted drift upward from sleep's depths. You wrap your cloak tighter, the air has bite tonight. You shuffle into the chapel with the others, silent figures in heavy robes, everyone looking like sleepy ghosts with cold noses. The only sound is the creak of ancient floorboards and the occasional cough echoing against the stone. This middle of the night, pause roughly between 1 and 3 a.m., wasn't seen as unnatural or unhealthy. In fact, many monks describe this time as their most lucid, their minds clear, untangled from daily distractions. The prefrontal cortex was taking a gentle breather. This was prime time for meditation, creativity, and, believe it or not, dream analysis. In fact, there's a fascinating study from the 1990s that accidentally rediscovered this. A researcher trying to recreate pre-industrial sleep patterns had subjects stay in darkness for 14 hours a night. After a few weeks, their sleep split into 2 distinct phases, separated by a calm, wakeful hour. People didn't feel anxious or restless during that middle stretch. They felt peaceful, curious, quietly awake. This eerie stillness is where monks found a kind of psychological liminality, a threshold state, not fully awake, not fully asleep. It allowed them to gently process emotions, internalize scriptures, or even just stare at a candle flame until their mind drifted back into rest. No Instagram, no FOMO, just soft silence and the occasional owl hooting outside. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. Some monks actually used this mid-night break to share dreams with each other. In hushed voices, they'd whisper surreal stories from their sleeping minds, half divine revelation, half-weird subconscious collage. If you dreamt of a glowing angel balancing on a turnip, that was fair game. If you confessed to dreaming about warm stew and a woman from the village, that might land you an extra hour of self-flagellation tomorrow. But you see, they had language for this, a culture around it. Today, if you wake up at 2 a.m. and scroll through Reddit, it's labeled insomnia. But in the medieval mind, this was fertile ground for spiritual work, for connecting with the self or the divine. Philosophers still argue whether the mind is more awake in darkness or just more suggestible. Was this nocturnal clarity truly profound, or was it just sleep, deprived confusion in a cassock? Back in the chapel, the chanting begins. You don't really sing it, more like your voice floats out of you, carried along by centuries-old cadences. The rhythm is repetitive, designed not to stimulate but to soothe. It draws you in like ocean waves, letting your tired mind anchor itself to each line. Psalms like lullabies, repetition as sedation. Some monks even reported slipping into altered states during these hours, light trances triggered by fatigue, ritual, and the sensory deprivation of darkness. Sound familiar? That's because it's remarkably close to what today's psychologists call hypnagogia, the transitional state between wakefulness and sleep, often linked to bursts of creativity and strange visions. Salvador Dali used to nap sitting upright with a spoon in his hand, so when he drifted too far into sleep and dropped it, the clang would wake him, right in the middle of hypnagogia. Monks, they just use the bell. As the chanting tapers off and candles are extinguished, you shuffle back to your cell. This return feels different. Your body is heavy, your breath slower. There's no pressure to stay awake. You don't even try to fall asleep. You just lie down and let your mind roll gently back under. This kind of surrender is key. Psychology today shows that people with insomnia often get trapped in a loop. Why can't I sleep? Which ramps up anxiety and pushes sleep further away. But monks didn't ask why. They didn't judge the rhythm, they simply followed it, accepting the brokenness as part of the pattern. And weirdly enough, that acceptance is the very thing that allows your brain to relax. You drift back into your second sleep. This one often ran from 3:30 to dawn, deep, dream, heavy, and restorative. There's something to learn from this. Not that you need to set your alarm for 2 a.m. and join a Gregorian Zoom choir, but maybe waking up at night isn't always a crisis. Maybe it's a window, a quiet place, a space to think. Next time it happens, instead of doom scrolling, try lighting a candle. Breathe. Don't do anything. Just exist, like the monks did, with no agenda but presence. Because sometimes the path back to sleep starts by walking softly through the dark with no intention of arriving. The morning light filters in soft and reluctant, spilling across your stone floor in silvery ribbons. You didn't hear the dawn bell, you felt it. The whole building seems to shift with the slow stirrings of day. Somewhere, a rooster crows like it's been holding it in for hours. You rise again. No fanfare, no double-shot espresso. Just a little groan from your knees and the rough rustle of wool robes. Your cell is still quiet, still your own. The walls haven't grown any closer overnight, but the solitude, it's starting to press a little heavier now. You might assume that monks, living in constant proximity to one another, never really felt alone. But here's the kicker, they were some of the loneliest people on earth. Imagine being surrounded by others 24/7 and barely ever making eye contact. You eat in silence, walk in silence. Even prayer is often internalized. You're not supposed to talk about the weather, your childhood trauma, or the strange dream where you turned into a chicken and preached to goats. This kind of structured isolation was intentional. The rule of Steb Benedict, the big monastic instruction manual, framed solitude as sacred. The idea was to strip away worldly distractions so you could hear the divine whisper, but what they didn't include in the footnotes was that your mind doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it screams in the silence. Mainstream psychology now acknowledges that social interaction is fundamental to human well-being. Loneliness has been linked to increased cortisol, reduced immune function, and even shorter lifespans. But monks didn't have group chats or therapy apps. They had walls, routines, and, well, mostly just walls, and yet they endured. Many even thrived. Why? Because they transformed loneliness into something else, something useful. They created meaning in the silence. You're sweeping the chapel now, wooden broom in hand, not thinking so much as unthinking. That's part of the trick. Manual tasks, mundane, repetitive. Ones have a sneaky way of clearing the clutter from your brain. Today, psychologists call it behavioral activation. Doing simple things can lift mood and reduce anxiety, especially in people experiencing depressive symptoms. Monks discovered this a millennium early. Still, there were limits. Even the holiest of brothers struggled. Monasteries kept detailed logs of monks going mad with melancholy, a diagnosis that probably bundled together depression, anxiety, and a whole cocktail of isolation-induced ailments. There are records of brothers fleeing the abbey without warning, running barefoot across frozen fields just to hear another human voice say something, anything not in Latin. Here's one of those fringe tidbits. In the 12th century, some monasteries began assigning spiritual brothers too, each monk quiet companions meant to offer subtle comfort. A nod in the corridor, a shared smile during chores, a silent witness to your existence. It was a primitive form of emotional anchoring, a way to keep people tethered when solitude turns stormy. And yet your mind starts to drift again, not unpleasantly, just away. Monks called this the noonday demon, a wave of restlessness and despair that often hit hardest during the late morning or early afternoon. You've prayed, you've worked, you've eaten half a beat. Now what? The noonday demon wasn't just about boredom, it was an existential itch. A sense that nothing matters, that time is endless and meaningless, and oh no, are you just going to die in this robe? Modern scholars refer to this as existential isolation, a sense of being fundamentally alone in your experience of the world. And yes, it's as delightful as it sounds, but monks didn't ignore this feeling. They named it, they expected it, they even prepared for it with rituals, prayer postures, and focused tasks. It wasn't wrong to feel this way. It was just part of the cycle. That framing alone had therapeutic value. Psychology now knows that when we normalize difficult emotions, they lose a lot of their sting. Philosophers still argue whether true solitude is ever achievable or even desirable. Are we meant to detach completely, or is that just a lofty illusion? For monks, it wasn't about escaping the world. It was about facing themselves fully, and that meant sitting quietly with the dark stuff too. So, you sit on a wooden bench near the herb garden. The sun is finally warm. Bees do their thing nearby, unbothered by your metaphysical angst. And suddenly you feel, not fixed, not joyful, but maybe seen, not by a person, necessarily, but by the rhythm of life continuing anyway. That's something monks clung to. The idea that nature, in its quiet persistence, offered companionship. They wrote about birds with a kind of reverent envy. Look at that blackbird, one journal entry notes. He does not need confession. He sings because he can. There's a low joke in that. Sure. But also a comfort. You're not the only thing alive in the silence. Today's therapist might recommend ecotherapy or grounding. Techniques put your hands in soil, watch clouds, hug a tree. Monks, they just did it. No hashtags, just connection. And here's the part worth remembering tonight. The loneliness you feel in your own room scrolling past smiling strangers on curated screens is not so different from the silence monks felt inside their stone cells. The context has changed, but the ache is familiar, and the remedy might be too: stillness, structure, acceptance. Maybe even just naming the feeling instead of fleeing from it. Because when you stop fighting the quiet, something softer can slip in, a kind of peace that doesn't shout, but hums, steady as breath. So, you rise from the bench. The bees don't care, but they follow you for a moment anyway. And as you return to your routine, the loneliness lingers, but it feels less like an enemy now, more like a roommate who just doesn't talk much, and honestly, that's okay. You don't hear laughter in a monastery, not the hearty belly deep kind. Maybe a soft snort during chores if someone drops a turnip, but never loud joy. That's not the vibe. Here, silence isn't just golden, it's required. You're in the refectory now, sitting on a hard bench, eating your single allotted bowl of porridge. No one speaks. The only sounds are wooden spoons against pottery and the steady drone of Latin being read aloud from a pulpit. It's not for entertainment, it's scripture, or saints. Biography, or a sobering lecture about sin. You chew, you listen, you try not to let your mind wander to roast chicken. This enforced. Silence, the great silence they called it, was more than a rule. It was a practice, a filter. It blocked out the noise of the world and forced you to live entirely within your own head. Now imagine doing that for months, years. Psychologists today understand the dual edge of silence. On one hand, quiet environments can reduce sensory overload, lower stress hormones, and enhance focus. There's real science behind silence therapy and mindful environments. On the other hand, too much silence, especially without social warmth, can trigger a cascade of stress responses. Isolation can spike cortisol, disturb sleep, and even mimic symptoms of trauma. So how did monks not go bonkers? Well, some did, but many more found creative ways to tiptoe around the silence without breaking it. You see, monastic silence wasn't total. It had loopholes. There were hand signals for daily needs. Point to your mouth for hungry, mime a cup for drink, pretend to shave for, due for a haircut. Some abbeys had entire, silent sign languages, centuries before formal ones like Ossiel emerged. These weren't deeply expressive, but they were human. They let the monks say, "I see you," without uttering a word. Then came the secret rebellions. Sometime 2 monks would linger during gardening, accidentally weeding the same patch of dirt just to whisper a few syllables. Others might exchange barely perceptible glances across the chapel. The older monks, wiser to the ways of quiet flirtation, generally turned a blind eye unless it got too obvious. This unspoken camaraderie created its own kind of intimacy. Today we might call it microconnection. Psychologists now understand that small non-verbal cues, eye contact, gestures, shared tasks, can build trust and connection just as powerfully as long conversations, especially in high silence environments like hospitals, space stations, or monasteries. And yes, not all the rebellion was cute. Occasionally, monks passed smuggled notes, crude drawings, even, brace yourself, satirical doodles in the margins of sacred texts. Imagine a tiny monk caricature slipping on a banana peel drawn next to a solemn passage about divine judgment. That's real. Medieval monks were bored sometimes, and boredom is the breeding ground of mischief. A 2015 psychological study on sensory deprivation found that when individuals are cut off from normal sensory input, especially social stimuli, the brain starts to generate its own entertainment. Daydreams, mental movies, even mild hallucinations. Some monks described this as divine inspiration. Others wrote about seeing shadows move or hearing music where none was playing. Science today would say, yeah, that tracks. But here's the interesting twist. They didn't panic. They accepted it. Instead of resisting the brain's weird late-night wanderings, they leaned in. A strange thought during Vespers. That might be the devil, or God, or lunch cravings wearing a disguise. Either way, you acknowledged it and returned to the chant. Philosophers still argue whether these silent disciplines created true spiritual insight or just induced controlled delusion. Was it revelation, or just long-term sleep deprivation mixed with groupthink? You're back in your cell now, finishing some quiet copying work. Your quill scratches gently across the parchment, and your mind hums, not loudly but steadily. Silence, once sharp-edged, has become background. The lack of speech no longer isolates you, it cradles you, gives you space to think, to feel, to breathe. Still, your body remembers it's human. Every now and then, you catch yourself mouthing a line from a psalm, or singing it silently in your head like an internal lullaby. It's not rebellion, it's self-soothing. Even in today's fast-paced world, this concept is making a comeback. Silent retreats are booming in popularity, and neuroscientists are finding that periods of intentional quiet can restore depleted attention, improve sleep, and even spark creativity. But the key is voluntary silence. When it's forced, like in solitary confinement, the psychological impact can be devastating. The monks managed it because their silence had purpose. It wasn't empty, it was filled with intention, prayer, focus, humility. When your quiet has structure, it becomes a container, not a void. And this brings us to a weird little detail. Some monasteries had talking rooms, not lounges, exactly. Just designated spaces where you could, for an hour or so, actually speak. You had to use them wisely, no rambling, no venting about how Brother Thomas keeps hogging the good turnips. But still, they were a pressure release valve, a way to keep the silence sacred by preventing it from becoming unbearable. So, what's the takeaway for you? Well, maybe it's that silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's presence in a different key. You don't have to talk to be understood. You don't have to be loud to be heard. And tonight, when you lie in your bed surrounded by the gentle buzz of night, your fan, your neighbor's TV 2 walls over, your own heartbeat humming in your ears, maybe you'll find a new relationship with silence. Not as something to fill, but as something that fills you. Not every quiet is loneliness. Some kias are a kind of hug. The bread is stale again, not offensively so, just enough to remind you you're not feasting. Your morning meal, if you can even call it that, consists of rough brown crusts and a tin cup of lukewarm water. Maybe if the stars align and someone made a mistake in the kitchen, there's a sliver of hard cheese, no sugar, no caffeine, no TikTok recipe hacks, and yet you feel oddly clear. That's the paradox of monastic eating. Plain, repetitive, even dull, but somehow strangely energizing in the long run. No crashing blood sugar, no bloating regret, just enough to keep your body humming like a quiet old violin. Modern psychology has circled back to this idea with a raised eyebrow. Turns out monkish minimalism in the diet department may have had unintentional benefits for the brain, especially when it comes to sleep. The concept of nutritional psychiatry is gaining ground. What you eat directly affects how you sleep, how you feel, and how you think. Diets high in sugar, caffeine, and artificial junk are associated with increased anxiety, disrupted circadian rhythms, and, you guessed it, trouble falling or staying asleep. Monks, by contrast, were living on what wellness influencers now call clean eating. No processed anything, just lentils, roots, grains, and the occasional goat-related surprise. Sure, they weren't choosing this for health reasons. It was about humility, denying the flesh, practicing temperance. But your gut doesn't know your motives. It just knows it's not overloaded. And your sleep, it quietly thanks you. You shovel in another spoon of whatever this beige mush is. Not tasty, not terrible. But as it sits in your belly, there's a kind of comforting weight to it. A grounding. You're not full, but you're not distracted by cravings either. You can think, you can listen, you can rest. Now let's talk about fasting. Because monks weren't just minimalist eaters, they also skipped meals regularly. During Lent, forget it. During certain holy days, dry bread if you're lucky. They weren't doing intermittent fasting to look good on the beach. They were doing it to feel closer to God. But the outcome surprisingly aligned with modern sleep science. Recent studies have shown that fasting can regulate sleep-wake cycles, promote deeper slow, wave sleep, and even reduce nighttime awakenings. Why? Partly because fasting reduces inflammation and balances hormones like cortisol and melatonin. Your body learns to run more efficiently on less, which means less internal chaos when you're trying to drift off. And then there's dopamine. Monks weren't chasing leisure, not through food, not through conversation, not through late night screen time. They kept their dopamine levels low and steady, and in doing so likely avoided the overstimulation that wrecks modern sleep. Psychologists now talk about dopamine fasting, the idea that reducing rewarding stimuli can reset your brain's reward system and make simple pleasures feel satisfying again. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Monks weren't binging Netflix. They were staring at candlelight and finding it enough. Fringe fact incoming. Some monastic orders actually had rules against seasoning food. That's right, no salt, no spices, no herbs. Not because they were allergic to flavor, but because pleasure was considered a spiritual distraction. Over time, this led to taste buds adapting so dramatically that even simple warm broth could feel luxurious. A sensory reset, centuries before anyone coined that term. Of course, not everyone was on board. Some monasteries had backroom deals, monks sneaking honey into porridge or trading tasks for a hard-boiled egg. We're only human, and yes, there are records of a few especially fed up brothers abandoning their posts entirely and running off to taverns. These were rare but glorious exceptions. Imagine explaining that to the abbot. Philosophers still argue whether discipline born of deprivation can ever lead to authentic joy. Is choosing discomfort a form of strength, or just disguised self-punishment? Monks certainly believed the former, but it's worth pausing there because the psychology is nuanced. What we do know is that when you remove hyperpalatable food from your routine, your brain recalibrates. Your dopamine baseline lowers. You start to notice subtler things, like the warmth of tea on your tongue or the rhythm of your breath, and that, strangely, helps with sleep. Because overstimulated brains don't rest easily. They fidget, they reach, they want one more bite, one more scroll, one more episode. But you finish your bowl, rinse it with cold water, and set it aside. Nothing special, nothing missing, just enough. Later that evening, after another round of prayer and a few hours of quiet work in the garden, you return to your cell with a belly that's not full but not fighting you. That matters. Your body isn't in repair mode because of junk food. It's just ready to wind down. You lie on the straw mattress, noticing how still your stomach feels. No bloating, no jittery caffeine residue, just breath. Slow, even breath. It doesn't feel like punishment anymore. It feels like clarity. Of course, modern life is different. You're not expected to give up chocolate or fast every other Tuesday. But maybe tonight you think twice about the midnight snacks or the sugary drinks right before bed. Maybe you borrow a little monkish restraint, not out of guilt, but out of curiosity. What would it feel like to go to bed, lightly, to let your body empty just enough to rest more deeply? Because monks weren't magical. They were just humans with boring food and good habits, and maybe that's all you need too. You step into the chapel just as the sky begins its soft blue transformation. The first light of dawn barely seeps through the high-arched windows, brushing the stone with gold and shadow. It's early, but not for you. You've been awake, asleep, awake again, not groggy, just aligned. Every movement now follows the horarium, the sacred timetable that structures your day like lines in sheet music. You rise before dawn, you pray. You work, you rest, you pray again. Each segment clicks into place like the gears of a great slow clock. There's no guesswork, no decision fatigue, no morning routine panic. This is the liturgy of the hours. A structure so meticulous that even your naps are scheduled. And as strange as it might sound, it's that very rigidity that helps your body and mind settle into deep, restorative sleep. Let's pause there, because here's the fascinating twist. All those bells, all that structure, they weren't designed with neuroscience in mind, but modern psychology is finally catching up. Regular circadian rhythm entrainment, fancy term for consistent scheduling, is one of the most powerful sleep regulators known to science. When you wake, eat, and rest at the same times each day, your internal clock stops fighting itself. Melatonin gets released like clockwork, literally. Cortisol peaks when it should, and the body's sleep-wake cycle stabilizes. And monks, they were doing this centuries before anyone knew what a hormone was. You move through the day not with rush, but with rhythm. Each prayer, matins, lauds, prime, tersex, none, vespers, compline, marks a new phase. But it's not just about faith, it's framing. Cognitive behavioral psychologists talk about behavioral cues that train the brain to transition smoothly between states. By aligning physical activity, stillness, light, and even language to specific hours, monks unintentionally created perfect circadian scaffolding. Suppre that to the average modern schedule: chaotic, overstimulated, lit up at midnight, dragged out of bed at 7, there's no rhythm. Just reaction, and our brains, they can't keep up. Now, you might be wondering, didn't monks get tired of all this repetition? Sure, the first few months were probably like Groundhog Day in a robe. But repetition is soothing when it's predictable. In fact, it's healing. Trauma therapists even use rhythmic repetition, like emder, drumming, or tapping, to help regulate dysregulated nervous systems. So when you pray the same psalm at the same hour every day, it's not about novelty, it's about stability. Your mind stops flailing. Your breath slows. You don't have to decide what comes next. You already know. And that gives your nervous system a chance to exhale. Quirky side note: some monks became so attuned to this rhythm that they'd wake up moments before the bell, no alarm, no nudging, just pure biological alignment. Their brains had become timekeepers, synced to the sun, the cycle, and the soul. Philosophers still argue whether surrendering to routine liberates the self or erases it. Are you becoming more you by aligning with nature, or less you by dissolving into it? Monks didn't worry about that. They saw time not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a river to float along. There's an unexpected beauty in that surrender. Later in the day, you walk through the cloister garden tending to herbs. The bell rings again. You stop mid-motion, bow your head, whisper a quick prayer, and then continue. It's like pressing pause on your thoughts, then picking up exactly where you left off. This micro-interruption keeps the mind limber. Today we might call it mindfulness. You return to your cell after dusk. The candles flicker, and the great silence begins. The structure has held you all day, guided your steps, buffered your thoughts, even softened your loneliness. And now, as you pull the blanket over your shoulders, your body knows what to do. There's no inner chatter wondering if it's too early to sleep. No scrolling, no existential Twitter spiral, just a low, predictable hum in your mind, a lullaby built from bells and breath. The psychology behind this is strong. Routine lowers cognitive load. When your day is scaffolded, your brain stops burning calories on constant decision-making. That frees up space for deeper sleep, emotional regulation, even creativity. You're not burned out. You're gently tired. Fringe fact of the night. In some monastic communities, the daily schedule was so embedded that monks were instructed not to look at the sun or track the time themselves. Trust the bells, they were told. Let the rhythm carry you. Surrender to it, and it will not let you fall. So tonight, maybe you try a little of that. No, you don't need to chant lauds or label your hours in Latin, but maybe your brain would appreciate knowing what comes next. Maybe a gentle bedtime, routine, same time, same signals, could become your own quiet ritual. A cup of tea, a few slow breaths, a candle lit, then blown out. Something that tells your mind the world is done for now. You can rest. Because monks weren't just disciplined, they were tuned in, and you can be too. The stone floor bites your soles the moment they touch it. The fire's long gone out. No fluffy slippers, no pre-warmed bed. You stretch under a wool blanket that feels like it was woven by someone angry and allergic to comfort. Your breath ghosts in the cold morning air. There's no central heating, just the warmth your own body holds, and even that's debatable. And yet, you feel oddly alive. You dress slowly, fingers stiff but determined, layering robes with a precision born from necessity. The cold isn't just physical, it's psychological. It shapes you don't fight it. You adapt. Modern psychology would call this environmental conditioning. Exposing yourself carefully and mindfully to controlled discomfort can lead to increased mental resilience. Think cold showers, ice baths, Wim Hof breathing. It's trendy now, but monks, they were doing it because they had no choice and accidentally built a fortress of tolerance in the process. There's a kind of mental clarity that sharpens when your body is slightly uncomfortable. You're alert, not distracted. You're present, not lulled into passivity. And strangely, it helps with sleep. Sound contradictory, right? But here's the twist. Being exposed to cool temperatures during the day actually aids your body's natural sleep mechanisms at night. You see, your core body temperature needs to drop slightly to initiate sleep. It's part of how melatonin gets released. If your environment is constantly warm, your body struggles to distinguish day from night. But if you spend your waking hours in brisk air like monks did, your body learns to respond to subtle shifts. Daylight, warmth, movement, wakefulness, darkness, stillness, cold, sleep. So when you finally curl into your straw-stuffed bed later tonight, the contrast hits differently. Your body sighs with relief. It knows it's time, and it's not just temperature. The overall austerity, the simplicity of your room, the scratchy textures, the absence of anything resembling luxury has a quiet psychological power. Studies in environmental psychology show that clutter, noise, and visual chaos overstimulate the brain and delay sleep onset. Monastic cells. The polar opposite, they're minimalist not because of design trends, but by theological design. No wall art, no decorations, no gadgets, just plain, earthy materials and the faint echo of prayer. That starkness, over time, trains the brain. Your cell becomes a cue, much like a bedtime ritual. You enter, and your mind begins to shut down its extra tabs. No comparison, no distraction, no internal performance. Still, monks weren't immune to the downsides. Harsh winters brought more than chill, they brought illness, fatigue, and the dreaded bone-deep ache of cold that sleep alone couldn't cure. Some monks wrote about lying awake at night, teeth chattering, counting Hail Marys like sheep. Others secretly stuffed extra straw under their robes, quiet rebellions against the ice. Fringe a detail. A few particularly cold abbeys had rotating warm rooms where monks could briefly stand by a hearth during the harshest months, but they were warm and not to linger. The fire was mercy, not indulgence. You head out now for morning labor. The sun hasn't quite risen, but the horizon glows faintly with that pre-dawn promise. Your breath puffs visibly. You carry water, chop wood, shovel manure. Each task grounds you in your body, not just as a temple, but as a tool, a vessel of service. And weirdly, these motions soothe the mind. Menial labor, especially repetitive physical tasks, has a calming effect on the nervous system. Today, occupational therapists call it boredom, upregulation. You're not calming your thoughts with your thoughts, you're using your body to signal to the brain, we're okay now. Philosophers still argue whether the body is a prison for the soul or its partner in transcendence. Monks, they leaned into the partnership. The cold wasn't punishment. It was partnership, something that reminded you where you ended and the world began. As the day warms slightly and the chores wind down, you return to the cloister to read. You hold the book, leather, bound, handwritten, sacred. Your fingers tingle from the cold, and the act of turning a page feels almost ceremonial. And then, just for a moment, you stop thinking. The chill, the rhythm, the silence, they combine into a state of absorption. You're not analyzing, you're not planning, you're simply being. Psychologists call this flow state, often associated with creativity or high-performance work. But it happens in quiet, cold spaces too, when all distractions are removed and the body is still. There's something profound about achieving that without screens, without input, without entertainment. Just you, the cold, and the text. Night comes again. The sun slips behind the hills, and a familiar hush drapes over the monastery. You light a single candle in your cell. The wax melts slowly, like time itself has decided to soften. You wrap yourself in your robe and lie down, the wool against your skin no longer bothersome. It's become background. A texture of the day, your body, tired from physical exertion and used to the temperature drop, responds immediately. Sleep isn't a fight anymore, it's an invitation. And maybe, just maybe, tonight you'll borrow this ancient wisdom. Turn down the thermostat, declutter your space, let your body feel a little cold, a little uncomfortable, and see what happens when the environment finally stops overstimulating you and starts supporting you. Because monks weren't masters of comfort, they were apprentices of resilience. And that resilience, it begins the moment you stop resisting the cold and let it shape your stillness. Evening, you shuffle into the chapel again, feet quiet on stone, breath steady. Tonight is different. Tonight there's chanting. You lower yourself onto the wooden bench, the kind that demands good posture or punishes you for slouching. The room smells of wax and something older than memory. A single candle flickers at the altar. The bell has rung for complying, the final prayer of the day, and then voices, soft, low, drawn out. The monks begin to sing in unison, their words floating in the ancient contours of Latin to Lucy's anteterminum. Before the end of light, we pray. It's not quite melody, not quite speech, something in between, something otherworldly, Gregorian chant. You're not sure when it happens, but your body begins to shift. Not physically, you're still as stone, but mentally you slip. The rhythm pulls at something under the surface. You're not analyzing the words. You're not thinking, you're feeling, like your thoughts have become liquid. Modern neuroscience is fascinated by this. Gregorian chant, with its slow, repetitive structure and absence of strong beat, has been shown to induce what's called the theta brainwave state. This is the space between waking and sleeping, where your mind softens, opens, and drifts. It's the same state people enter during deep meditation, hypnosis, or just before sleep. Theta waves are linked to creativity, intuition, and emotional processing. And here's the kicker: your brain seems to like them. Chanting, especially in a group, can synchronize brain activity across individuals. Your mind begins to echo the rhythm. It's like musical social glue. You are not alone, you are part of the sound. This goes far beyond lullabies. The psychological effect of group chanting can reduce anxiety, lower heart rate, and increase production of gamma-aminobutyric acid GABA, a neurotransmitter that helps you calm down and fall asleep. Monks weren't just praying, they were creating a biological cocoon. And they knew it well, maybe not in terms of GABA and theta waves, but they understood the effect. Accounts from medieval abbeys often describe compline as the most peaceful, sleep-inducing office of the day. Many monks claimed that, after chanting, their thoughts would quiet completely. Some said they'd fall asleep before even reaching their cells. Fringe fact. A few particularly enthusiastic communities would extend compline with processional chants, walking slowly in a circle while singing. The motion, paired with voice and candlelight, became a kind of walking meditation, like a medieval sound bath with sore ankles. Tonight, as the chant continues, your breath slows to match the cadence. The words blur into syllables. The room becomes less like a place and more like a hum. You're not sure when the chant ends, only that you're already floating when it does. Back in your cell, the silence feels different now. Not empty, but full. Like the chant has left a soft residue on your skin. You lie down, eyes open just enough to catch the glow of the candle's final flicker. And then you remember that study in 2008, where patients with insomnia were played recordings of Gregorian chant before bed. Nearly all reported deeper sleep and shorter time to sleep onset. Why? Because the brain recognizes the pattern. Predictability equals safety. Safety equals sleep. Philosophers still argue whether music speaks to something eternal in the soul or is just pattern recognition dressed in poetry. But here, now, in this tiny room with stone walls and a scratchy blanket, you don't care. The chant is gone, but the rhythm remains. Your thoughts sway with it, not sharply, gently, like reeds in slow water. There's also something to be said for the monotone of the chant. No wild leaps, no drama. Unlike modern music that builds tension and then explodes into chorus, Gregorian chant levels out your emotional topography. You're not taken on a journey, you're held in place. And for your nervous system, that's a gift. In today's world, we often chase stimulation. Bright screens, thumping music, endless scrolls. The dopamine spikes and crashes keep our brains on edge. But chanting, it removes the spikes. You flatten, you soften, you come down. It's no coincidence that chant traditions exist in nearly every contemplative practice across the world. Hindu mantras, Buddhist throat singing, Islamic dhikr. Humans need rhythmic vocal sound. It connects us to breath, to body, to each other, and most of all, to sleep. Tonight, your inner voice doesn't yammer. It hums. And not with panic or to-do lists, but with the echo of that last note from Compline. You don't need melatonin, you have melody. So maybe tomorrow you experiment, not with full-blown monastic chanting unless you're feeling bold, but with vocal rhythm. A prayer, a hum, a poem spoken slowly. Something you repeat not to perform, but to remember that your body has its own music. And sometimes sleep is just a matter of listening to it, because monks didn't fall asleep because they were exhausted. They fell asleep because their minds were tuned, and you're learning to tune yours too. You wake not with a start, but with a drift. The line between dream and waking is blurry, soft, edged. You lie still, staring at the rafters, letting the fragments settle. A silver-winged figure. Ode through mist, a library made of clouds, a voice whispering your name in a language you didn't know you knew. No, it wasn't just a dream, not here, not in this place. Dreams are more than stories, they messages, maybe divine, maybe delusional, but they're not meaningless. Monks placed a strange kind of importance on their dreams, equal parts spiritual reflection and psychological theater. While the modern world mostly treats dreams like quirky brain static or raw material for Reddit threads, the medieval monks saw each dream as a potential signpost on the road to salvation or temptation. And those middle of the night visions, those were prime time. Remember segmented sleep from earlier? That nighttime window between first sleep and second sleep. It turns out modern research has confirmed that this intermediate phase is a hotbed for vivid, often surreal dreams. During that mid-wakeful period, the boundary between conscious thought and unconscious symbolism softens. You're not quite dreaming, but not quite awake, and that's where the magic seeps in. Psychologists call this the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states, those liminal brainwave zones when you're falling asleep or waking up. These states can involve fleeting visions, odd body sensations, and even full-blown auditory hallucinations. Most people just shake them off, but monks, they wrote them down. You picture it now, a monk hunched over a desk at 2:45 a.m. scratching out descriptions of a flaming wheel that told him to forgive Brother Francis, or a disembodied voice that said skip the lentils. These weren't dismissed, they were interpreted, often with the help of a spiritual advisor, or, let's be honest, with the help of the monastery gossip circuit. Some abbeys even kept dream journals, a kind of holy dream diary where monks would record visions for later study. And sure, some entries are clearly symbolic, others downright weird. One account describes a monk dreaming of a talking donkey who quoted scripture and then exploded into bees. No theological consensus on that one, surprisingly. Modern dream researchers love this stuff. Freud would have had a field day with medieval monks. But contemporary studies have added nuance. Dreams may serve as emotional regulators, integrating our daily experiences and unmet psychological needs. They're messy, yes, but meaningful, even the bizarre ones. And when you're cut off from social media, television, casual conversation, and, well, everything else, dreams become your brain's only sandbox, your only theater, and maybe your only friend. But not all monk dreams were pleasant. Some were terrifying. You've probably heard the phrase old hag syndrome or sleep paralysis. Monks had a different word for it, the demon that sits on your chest, because when you're lying on your back in total darkness, barely able to breathe or move, and you think something's in the room with you, you don't assume it's just poor sleep hygiene. You assume it's evil. Sleep paralysis has been documented across nearly every culture on Earth, but in the monastery it was deeply spiritualized. Sometimes it was considered punishment for pride, other times a test of faith. You didn't treat it with medication, you treated it with prayer. Lots and lots of prayer. Fringe note: some monks slept in intentionally uncomfortable positions to avoid the devil. Posture akebis, sleeping on your back. Others kept relics, bones, bits of cloth, even old rosaries under their pillows for spiritual protection. The line between sleep disorder and spiritual warfare was thin. Philosophers still argue whether dreams are messages from the soul or noise from the brain. Are we peeking into the divine or just shaking loose the leftovers of daily life? The monks didn't care. They simply watched, recorded, reflected. Back in your cell, you sit on the edge of the bed, feet touching cold stone, trying to remember your dream. Was it a forest? A flame? A face you haven't seen since childhood? It fades fast like ink and rain, but the feeling lingers. This matters. Even now, therapists sometimes ask patients to record their dreams, not to interpret them like horoscopes, but to notice patterns, recurring emotions, unmet needs, clues, because sometimes your subconscious is braver than you are, and it says the things you don't dare admit aloud. You take a deep breath. The air is cool and quiet. Nothing stirs except a bird outside the window. Then, without thinking, you pick up your journal and write down one word: stillness. You're not sure if it was in your dream. You're not sure if it's from God, but it feels important, and maybe that's enough. Because tonight, as you prepare for rest again, you're not trying to escape your dreams. You're welcoming them. The good, the strange, the symbolic. You're opening the door for your brain to tell you a story, however weird or wonderful it may be. And in a world that's always trying to sell you sleep as a problem to be fixed, there's something radical in simply letting your mind wander. So go ahead, lie down, close your eyes, and don't just fall asleep, follow it. Let your dreams talk back. Because monks knew a secret: sleep isn't the end of the day, it's the beginning of a conversation. You're walking slowly through the cloister, sandals whispering on stone, robe trailing just behind you. There's nothing pressing, no notifications pinging, no new messages waiting for replies. The only feed is the breeze shifting the ivy near the chapel wall, and weirdly, you're bored, not anxious, not sad. Just plain, pure, unflavored boredom. The monks had it in spades. No games, no drama, no endless streams of carefully edited faces, no scrolling, just you, your thoughts, and the shape of silence stretching through hours. And here's the paradox: boredom used to be valuable. Monks didn't fear it, they trained through it. Modern psychology has only recently begun to reclaim boredom as a kind of cognitive fertilizer. Studies now show that periods of low stimulation actually promote creativity, emotional insight, and even better sleep. When your brain isn't being constantly pinged and distracted, it starts to wander inwards, and sometimes toward the profound. But let's not sugarcoat it. The first few weeks of monastic life were often mentally brutal. The silence, the repetition, the lack of stimulation, it stripped the outer layers of the self. Many new monks reported feeling emotionally raw, directionless. Some had to physically restrain themselves from blurting words just to break the quiet. Imagine it. You, lying on your back at twilight, staring at the ceiling and realizing that no one's going to ask how your day was. Ever. That your jokes, your stories, your random intrusive thoughts, they're staying inside. At first, it feels like solitude, then like exile. Then, if you're lucky, like freedom. And yes, there were monks who craved attention, just like we do now. They would cough dramatically during prayer, hold their hand signals longer than needed, find excuses to hover near the kitchen. You don't just delete the need for validation because you put on a robe, you wrestle with it. Fringe detail. In some stricter orders, monks were forbidden to look into mirrors. Not just because vanity was a sin, but because they believed self-reflection should come from the inside, not from how your nose looks in candlelight. No selfies, no filters. Just the unfiltered you, day after day. Modern social scientists might call this the rejection of externalized identity construction. No profile pics, no hashtags. Just your name in the prayer book and your footsteps in the dirt. Still, there was an ache. The monks wrote about it often, a slow, gnawing hunger to be seen, even if not applauded, just seen. In psychological terms, we'd call this social mirroring, the process by which we understand who we are through the reflection of others. In the monastery, that mirror was internalized, harsh, honest, and incredibly still. Philosophers still argue whether identity is shaped more by others or by solitude. Are you who you are in a crowd, or only when no one's watching? But monks took it further. They believed you could only meet God after letting go of the need to be anyone at all. You lean against a column now, watching the shadows lengthen. The boredom is still there, but it doesn't itch as much. It starts to feel like a space. Wide, neutral, safe, not needing to be filled. Just held. Modern therapists now recommend dopamine detoxes for people addicted to stimulation periods where you intentionally remove all sources of instant gratification. No phone, no sugar, no news, just stillness. And for many, the first few hours feel unbearable. But then comes a strange release. Your brain, freed from the pressure to be entertained, begins to settle. Thoughts slow. Breathing deepens. Ideas arrive gently, without trying. The need dissolves, and what's left is quiet presence. That's what monks lived in every day. Not because it was easy, but because they believed the soul was hiding underneath the noise. Still, they weren't robots. There were bad days, times when monks admitted to crying, to panicking, to mentally composing conversations they'd never get to have. One monk even described shouting silently into the rafters, a meltdown without sound. But over time, those moments passed, and in their place came peace, not the loud, euphoric kind, but the gentle settling of sediment at the bottom of a glass. And here's the part that matters for you tonight. Boredom before bed is good. Your brain doesn't want to be stimulated before sleep. It doesn't want plot twists or hot takes or that oddly satisfying video of someone cutting soap. It wants the mental equivalent of soft candlelight and slow movement. It wants monody, simplicity, predictable patterns. So maybe, just maybe, you let yourself get bored before bed. You don't reach for your phone the moment restlessness hits. You don't force your brain to reform. You just sit, breathe, stare at the ceiling. Let the mind deflate slowly like a balloon leaking air. Because monks weren't constantly serene, they were constantly surrendering to silence, to boredom, to the void where distraction used to live. And in that surrender, something happened. The mind, finally left alone, began to rest deeply. So tonight, try boredom. Let it bore you to sleep. You might just dream something worth remembering. The chapel is dark, save for a few flickering candles that toss long, exaggerated shadows along the stone walls. You kneel. The cold seeps through your robes, pressing into your knees, your spine, your neck. But you stay there, still, silent, and you ask a question. Not out loud, not even fully formed, just a feeling. Is anyone listening? Welcome to the nightly quiet ache of monastic faith. It's not all angels and peace here. It never was. For every monk with a serene expression and a prayer on his lips, there's another quietly battling a tide of existential dread. Not because he doubts the faith, but because he doesn't know if it's working. You've done everything right. You've prayed, chanted, fasted, kept your silence. But still, some nights the doubt creeps in like a fog under the door. Are you heard? Are you seen? Are you still you beneath all this sacred repetition? This wasn't a flaw in monastic life. It was monastic life. Faith wasn't a shortcut to certainty. It was a relationship with unknowing. And in the silence of those stone chapels, monks learned to sit with it. Not solve it, not escape it, just sit with it. Modern psychology calls this spiritual anchoring, using belief systems to give meaning and structure to life's uncertainties. It's strongly correlated with resilience, lower levels of depression, and better sleep. But it's not because you believe everything's fine. It's because you believe it might still be okay, even when it doesn't feel fine. Here's the fascinating part. Monks understood this ambiguity. They didn't expect to feel bliss during every prayer. In fact, many journals describe long stretches of dryness, prayers that felt hollow, hours that passed without a single flicker of peace. They called it acedia, or the dark night of the soul, a kind of spiritual depression. Sound familiar? Today, psychologists might diagnose it as low-grade chronic despair, a form of existential burnout. But monks, they stayed with it, not because they were immune, but because they trusted that meaning would return, even if the feeling didn't. Fringe detail. Some monks carried small stones in their robes. Smooth, weighty, worn by thumb over time. They'd grip them during prayer, not because the stones were holy, but because the texture gave their fingers something to hold on to when their minds were slipping. Like a spiritual fidget toy centuries ahead of schedule. Philosophers still argue whether belief can exist without emotional proof. Is it faith if you feel nothing? Or is it only real because you feel nothing and choose to believe anyway? You rise slowly from the chapel floor and return to your cell. The candlelight seems smaller tonight, the shadows taller. You sit on the edge of the bed staring at the crucifix. It doesn't speak. It never does, but somehow its silence feels familiar. And here's the thing, monks knew the mind could unravel without grounding. So they developed tools, not flashy ones, but small, steady anchors to tie the soul to the moment. Breath, posture, repetition, simple prayers, rosaries, rhythmic motion. All of them designed to guide the mind back into the body when it threatened to spin off into anxious orbit, what we now call somatic regulation. One monk described it like this: when my mind forgets the path, my body remembers. That's why monks knelt, why they bowed, why they made the sign of the cross. These weren't just rituals, they were interruptions to spiraling thought. Tonight, as you pull the blanket over your shoulders, your mind wanders again. Not wildly, just restlessly. The quiet feels too big, the room too still. You start to think, shouldn't I feel something more? But maybe the monks had it right. Maybe the goal isn't to feel something. Maybe it's to stay with the discomfort, the uncertainty, the silence, and let your body carry you through it. Sleep doesn't come because you force it. It comes because you allow it. Like faith, like surrender. And let's be honest, most of us are scared of surrender. We're addicted to control, to results, to guarantees, but monks gave up those things on purpose. And in return, they found a kind of rest that didn't depend on the right mood or the perfect lighting. It just was. So tonight, if you lie in bed wondering whether your life is on track, whether your efforts matter, whether your thoughts mean anything, don't rush to fix it. Don't chase a distraction. Just lie there. Breathe. Let the questions be unanswered for now. Because monks lived their whole lives in that state and still found peace. Not in certainty, but in trust. Not in perfect sleep, but in the knowledge that rest eventually comes, even if it takes its time. So kneel if you want to. Whisper something, if it helps. But if all you can do is lie still and listen to the dark, that's okay too. It's all part of the prayer. The sun is higher now, casting long stripes across the courtyard where you stand holding a broom. You've been sweeping for what feels like a small eternity, but you're not watching the clock. There is no clock. Just the scrape of bristles against stone, the whisper of leaves skittering away from your path, the ache in your lower back reminding you that your body is working, moving, alive. In the monastery, physical labor isn't a chore. It's a practice, not just for maintenance, but for mental health. Modern psychology has a name for this: moving meditation. It's the art of bringing mindfulness into your body through repetitive, focused action. And monks, though they never called it that, were absolute masters. You rinse the flagstones with a wooden bucket, watching the water spread like ink across the courtyard. It's not exciting. It's not dramatic, but you're calm, present. You're not refreshing a feed, you're scrubbing one. Monks spent hours every day engaged in work that was deeply physical. Tending gardens, kneading bread, chopping firewood, mending robes. These weren't just chores, they were spiritual disciplines. A way to keep the body busy enough that the mind could settle, or better yet, disappear entirely for a while. Fringe tidbit: the rule of Stead Benedict specifically warned against idleness, calling it the enemy of the soul, but they didn't fill time with sermons or debates. They filled it with dirt under their fingernails and the rhythmic clack of tools against wood. Manual labor wasn't beneath them, it saved them. Today, psychologists recognize the power of embodied tasks. Repetitive physical actions have been shown to reduce rumination, lower anxiety, and improve sleep quality. It's no coincidence that some of the most sleep-deprived people in modern society, those glued to screens, overwhelmed by information, rarely do anything with their hands besides typing or scrolling. But you're hoeing the earth now, and with each motion, a thought falls away. You're not thinking about whether you're succeeding. You're not evaluating your performance. You're just here, dirt, sweat, breath, that's it. And this connection to the earth, it matters. There's growing evidence that being outdoors, especially engaging in repetitive physical labor, helps reset the body's stress response. It's called biophilia, our innate need to connect with nature. Monks didn't garden for aesthetic Instagram shots. They did it because the soil calms the storm. Philosophers still argue whether meaning is found in contemplation or in action, monks said. Why not both? Think while you weed, pray while you dig. Let your hands move so your thoughts can find stillness. You head to the kitchen next. There's grain to grind. You turn the millstone, round and round and round, feeling the tension in your shoulders soften as your mind slips into rhythm. The noise, the weight, the simple goal of turning something whole into something useful. It pulls you inward. Ever heard of flow state? Of course you have. It's that sweet spot where challenge and focus meet. When time stops, your self-awareness fades and your mind is fully immersed. Turns out monks hit that state a lot. Not while composing symphonies or climbing mountains, but while peeling root vegetables, scrubbing pots, fetching water. And they understood that how you work matters more than what you do. Every action was a prayer. Every task, an opportunity to practice patience, humility, and presence. They weren't working to earn rest, they were working within rest. You sit now in the shade, drinking a ladle of cool water from a wooden cup. Your arms are sore, your tunic is dusty, but your heart, it's still, not happy, not sad, just quiet. This is what monks sought, not bliss, not enlightenment, but evenness. A state where thoughts stop crashing against the walls and simply float. And tonight, when you return to your cell, you'll sleep differently, not because you're exhausted, but because you're emptied. There's nothing left to process. The body has done its part. The brain doesn't need to untangle a web of digital noise or interpersonal drama. It just rests. Modern therapists might suggest knitting, coloring, cleaning, any slow, repetitive task to bridge the gap between overstimulation and rest. The monks, they were doing that 900 years ago with a rake. Maybe that's your takeaway tonight. Not that you need to join a monastery or churn butter at sunset, but that your body is your mind's best anchor. When sleep feels distant, try returning to something simple. Something real. Fold laundry, sweep the floor, pull weeds. Not to be productive, but to be present, because sleep isn't just about lying still. It's about living in a way that makes stillness feel safe. And if monks could find that peace with bare hands and wooden tools, maybe, just maybe, you can too. The bell tolls again, a hollow sound, deep and slow, vibrating through stone like it's moving time itself. You stop mid-step, exhale, and bow your head. It's time. No, not for sleep, not for work, for something else. Confession. You enter the side chapel where a single stool and a wooden partition await. There's no booth with velvet curtains, just open air and expectation. The monk who sits across from you doesn't look at you, not directly. He waits, you kneel, and now, you speak, not loudly, not fluently, but honestly. You tell him that you've been tired, distracted, that you wanted to snap at Brother Clement because he slurps his soup, that you hid a second piece of bread, that you zoned out during Vespers and thought about clouds instead of psalms. You say these things and they feel both enormous and ridiculous. But somehow after you feel lighter. Welcome to the monastic practice of penance, not just as punishment, but as emotional release. Modern psychology has a lot to say about guilt, that sticky, echoing emotion that lingers long after the deed. It can fester. It can block sleep, create stress loops, even manifest physically. But confession, real confession, isn't just about naming what you did, it's about being witnessed in your imperfection and told, you can start again. For monks, this wasn't optional. It was scheduled, weekly, sometimes daily. Not just for big sins, but for the smallest ripples. Not because they were neurotic, but because they understood something we often forget. The soul, like the mind, needs decluttering. And here's the fringe twist. These rituals, though spiritual, had strong psychological function. Confession offered cognitive closure, a full stop. A way to say, I've dealt with this. The act of voicing guilt out loud, especially in a ritualized, structured setting, creates a neurological sense of relief. Brain scans show that talking about guilt reduces activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the area associated with error detection and discomfort. Translation: it quiets the part of your brain that keeps yelling you messed up. You leave the chapel now. No parade, no applause. Just the sense that you've been emptied and can now be filled with something gentler. But here's where things get complicated, because sometimes confession wasn't enough. Some monks took penance further, too far. Self-flagellation, fasting, voluntary isolation. They believed pain could purify, that to truly cleanse the soul, you had to suffer. Modern psychology frowns at this, rightly recognizing the line where ritual becomes self-harm. But for monks, the body was the battleground, and guilt was the weapon. Still, not all penance was dramatic. Much of it was humble extra chores, fewer rations, a day of silence. And while some of that borders on obsessive, there's a piece of it that still holds value: accountability. Ownership, the act of saying, yes, I slipped, and here's how I'll step forward again. Philosophers still argue whether guilt is moral compass or mental trap. Does it make us better, or does it chain us to a version of ourselves we're trying to outgrow? Monks leaned into the betterment. They didn't let guilt fester. They didn't ignore it. They pulled it into the light, named it, bowed to it, and then moved on. Tonight, you return to your cell after evening prayers. There's a quiet in your chest you hadn't noticed before. Not emptiness, more like clearing. You didn't confess anything dramatic, just the small truths, the pettiest thoughts. But it helped. Your mind feels aired out, like you opened a window somewhere inside. And when your head hits the pillow, there's no parade of self-recriminations. No replaying every awkward thing you said in 5th grade. Just stillness, just space. It makes you wonder, what if you created a ritual like that? Not necessarily a confessional booth, though, no judgment if you're into the aesthetic. But maybe something you do at night, a mental clearing. 5 quiet breaths, a whispered, I forgive you. A journal note, here's where I slipped. Here's how I'll return. Because you don't need to be perfect to sleep well. You just need to stop punishing yourself for being human. The monks weren't flawless. They were deeply flawed, often frustrated, sometimes absurd. But they built a system that allowed for redemption before sunrise. They didn't go to bed burdened. They went to bed clean, not by scrubbing harder, but by acknowledging the mud. So tonight, if something weighs on you, say it, whisper it, write it, admit it, and then, like the monks, let it go. Because sleep, like grace, rarely comes to those still gripping guilt, but when you open your hands, that's when rest walks in. You walk the corridor slowly, tracing a familiar path along weathered stone and worn wooden beams. You know every creak, every candle sconce, every crack in the plaster. You're surrounded by people, but not in the way you're used to. They walk near you, parallel, not close. Silent, not distant. You might share a glance during prayer or pass each other in the orchard, nodding, acknowledging, but barely touching the edges of each other's lives. This is monastic brotherhood, and it's a very different kind of together. In our modern world, loneliness is often measured in likes, messages, or proximity to crowds. But monks lived in a paradox, surrounded by others, yet deeply alone. They didn't share memes or heart. 2 hearts in the cloister kitchen, no sleepovers, no late-night confessionals over cheap wine. Just an unspoken understanding that you were walking the same narrow road, side by side, even if your eyes rarely met. And somehow it worked, because this illusion of isolation came with something else, a shared rhythm. That's the part modern psychology finds fascinating, when individuals synchronize their daily routines, even in silence. They develop a kind of passive bonding. It's called social synchrony. Your heart rates, breath patterns, and even hormonal cycles start to align. You feel in tune even if you never say a word. Think of how people on a long hike bond without talking, or strangers on a retreat who feel connected after a silent breakfast. The monks, they were in that state perpetually, and it mattered, because even though you didn't confide in your brother, you still knelt beside him 5 times a day, you still harvested turnips together, you still watched the stars flicker from the same windowsill. And that kind of shared presence was enough to stave off the deepest layers of loneliness. Fringe detail. Some monasteries intentionally paired younger monks with older ones, not for mentorship, but for what we'd now call emotional buffering. The older monk didn't teach exactly. He witnessed. Just by existing nearby, he anchored the younger monk in place, a steady presence, like a lighthouse that doesn't speak. Of course, there were tensions. Silent ones, mostly brothers who avoided eye contact. Rivalries played out through who weeded the best garden rose. One monk might cough passive, aggressively every time another stepped out of line. Humans will always human. And there were the heartbreaks too. A sudden death from illness. A quiet departure in the night. Monks weren't supposed to form attachments, but they did. They grieved deeply, often silently. One account tells of a monk who carved a tiny cross into the chapel bench after his friend died, so he could place his fingers on it during prayer and remember he wasn't alone. Philosophers still argue whether solitude enhances connection or erodes it. Is it better to be alone among others, or truly alone? The monastic life walked that razor's edge, using shared structure to hold the space where conversation would normally live. You head to the refectory now. Rows of brothers sit in silence, heads bowed over bowls of soup. No one speaks. But the shared breath, the synchronized movements, the lifting of spoons, the slight tilt of heads during the reading create a rhythm that holds you all in place. A kind of quiet choreography. It's not warm in the way you might crave, but it's steady, and sometimes that's enough. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that shared rituals, whether religious or secular, release oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Even without words, the act of participating in a collective experience creates a sense of belonging. The monks weren't isolated by silence. They were bound by it. You return to your cell at dusk. Along the hallway, candlelight flickers in a dozen identical rooms. You can't hear your brothers, but you know they're there, kneeling, reading, preparing for rest. You lie down. The straw mattress is familiar now. Your body relaxes on cue, and you realize you haven't had a conversation in days, but you haven't felt lonely in the way you used to, because true connection doesn't always come in sound. Sometimes it comes in rhythm, in proximity, in the gentle awareness that someone else is walking beside you, even if your paths don't cross directly. So tonight, maybe you think less about your inbox, less about the unread messages and unreturned calls, and more about presence. Is there someone who walks your same rhythm? Someone who breathes near your sleep cycle? Maybe it's a pet, a partner, a neighbor with the same bedtime lamp glow. Maybe you're not as alone as you think, because monks learned that even in silence we're never completely alone. We just need to listen to the rhythm around us. The final candle flickers low on your cell's wall, its golden glow shrinking down to a pinpoint of trembling light. Your robe, rough and familiar, folds around your legs like an old memory. The wind outside is soft tonight, almost curious, slipping through the narrow window slats with a sigh. You sit on your bed, cross-legged, hands resting loosely in your lap. There is nothing left to do. This is the ancient art of letting go. Monks didn't crash into sleep. They entered it, like stepping through a door that had always been there. No late night browsing, no snacks, no just one more page. Their world prepared them for sleep with the slow layering of stillness. Each prayer, each task, each pause in the day's momentum peeled back a little more noise. By now, you felt it too. A kind of softening around the edges of your thoughts. A surrender that doesn't mean failure, but trust. You've watched the day unfold in slow rhythm. You've learned, like the monks did, that rest is not earned through exhaustion, but through release. Here's where it gets beautifully strange. Monks didn't see sleep as downtime. They saw it as part of the soul's rhythm. They believed the body might rest, but the spirit continued dreaming, reaching, sometimes even praying unconsciously. The night wasn't an end, it was a threshold. And to pass through that threshold, they developed a simple ritual. Not a long checklist, just a breath, a whisper, a single phrase. Often, it was the last line of compline. Into your hands, O Lord. I commend my spirit, not because they expected to die in their sleep, though. Fair enough, it was the 12th century. But because they wanted to hand over the burdens of the day, the doubts, the failures, the tight, clinging worries that huddled at the edges of the mind. Modern psychology would call this cognitive offloading, the act of releasing internal tension through external action, a journal entry, a mantra, a bedtime prayer. The brain, given permission to let go, finally allows sleep to arrive. Fringe detail. Some monks would place their sandals neatly beside the bed, not for order, but as a reminder. You are ready to rise again tomorrow. Even sleep was nested within hope. Philosophers still argue whether sleep is a surrender to the unconscious or an invitation to mystery. Is it an escape or a sacred reunion with something bigger than us? The monks didn't argue, they just slept, and they made their sleep holy. Tonight you stretch out beneath your blanket. The air is cool, your breath is deep. The last sound in your ears might be the echo of your own heartbeat, slow and even. You've done enough. You don't need to win the night. You don't need to process everything. You don't need to fix, analyze perfect. Just let go. Just let sleep come. So now, as we draw this journey to a close, take a deeper breath. Let it fill your lungs gently, no rush. Let it go slowly, like you're releasing a paper lantern into a dark sky. You've walked through cold corridors, felt the silence settle on your shoulders, and touched a rhythm that belongs to something older than memory. You've sat with discomfort, boredom, quiet joy. You've watched thoughts rise, then drift away again. Sleep is near, but you don't need to chase it, let it find you. In the monastery, night came not as a signal to shut down, but as an invitation to soften, to let the body do what it was always meant to do. To trust that rest isn't something we must deserve. It's something we remember how to allow. So as you lie there, wherever you are, in your bed, in a dark room, in a world that spins too fast, know this. Stillness is not empty. It's full of breath, full of presence, full of space. And tomorrow will come, but it's not yours yet. Right now, it's just you and the quiet, and the soft hum of peace, like monks chanting across centuries just for you. Sleep well, gentle soul. Sleep easy. Sleep long. You're already home.